Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpointi tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. A hardcore of protesters is refusing to budge from Parliament 4 days into the demonstration, with more people still arriving. Despite being trespassed, they're digging in for the weekend. The police say misinformation in a variety of causes and motivations is making it difficult to resolve the situation. Our political reporter Katie Scotcher is at Parliament.
4 days into the anti-mandate, anti-vaccine protest at Parliament, and the demonstration is starting to look more like a music festival. Parliament's lawn resembles a campsite with more tents and marquees erected as the number of protesters grows. One is being used as a merch stand, selling t-shirts and organic popcorn, another for first aid. Food trucks have pulled up on Molesworth Street too. Trespassed protesters are showing no signs of leaving.
We're just going to stay put.
A single line of officers has lined Parliament's forecourt and hasn't crossed the barrier onto Parliament's lawn. It's a stark contrast to yesterday's enforcement action. The police arrested at least 120 people and removed a few tents. Protesters have been preparing for the arrests to resume.
We need to stay peaceful, we need to not react.
While the demonstrators have no clear leader, one protester issued these instructions.
Remember, if it comes in, we sit in circles, we link arms, we sit down, we face each other. And if we see anybody stepping out of line, agitating, pull them back into the fold.
The police say they're taking a measured approach and continue to explore options to resolve the disruption. Retailers around Wellington who didn't want to be named are desperate for one.
It's been pretty full on with people, like walking around. Some of our suppliers' representatives don't show up because of the safety reason. I haven't seen a lot of my regulars this week yet.
A guy came on the other day. He was not even wearing a mask. He was a little aggressive when we said, sorry, we can't serve you. He was not happy.
After 4 days of disruption in the capital with streets in the CBD still blocked, Wellingtonians also want the protesters gone.
Some people yell at us just for wearing face masks.
I've avoided them as much as possible, got dropped off away and
I didn't mind the first day. Yeah, everyone can protest, that's great, but it's gone on a bit too long.
The tent city spreads beyond Parliament's lawn. Much of Victoria University of Wellington's Law and Business School is covered too. Its students and staff have been told to work from home. Jessica Godfrey is the general manager of Vic Books, a cafe and bookstore inside the university. She says protesters are becoming more hostile each day.
My feeling is almost I'd be safer to just take my mask off so that I'm not highlighting myself as not one of them.
There are hopes heavy rain and strong wind in Wellington over the weekend will drive protesters away. But with demonstrators assembling more tents and handing out rain ponchos, it could take more than that for the disruption in the capital to end.
And joining me now is Wellington District Commander Superintendent Corrie Parnell. Kia ora, Superintendent. Can you explain to us why this is taking so long?
Kia ora, team. It's never going to be resolved overnight, and the complexity and the number of issues at hand in terms of the task we have in front of us is going to take some time.
So you've said there are different groups. It's hard to identify leadership. Who's in the mix there? Who have you identified in terms of causes?
There's various causes, so I think it's quite a core group in respect of anti-mandate, vaccination, all things COVID. You've got 1080 causes, freedoms and rights, right through to sort of single mandate people's views of various things in terms of anti-government. But what's been one of the difficulties for us in terms of the group as an entirety, lack of leadership, has even been, we've observed over this week, their own in-house fighting between various fractions, and at times have evicted certain aspects of the crowd. And despite our best efforts to try and identify and engage with any sort of leadership, and get some sort of go forward there. That has been a difficulty for police.
Are there far-right extremist groups in there?
Not that we've observed to date. We have had a presence at time of some identifiable gangs, but no sort of national security risks to us at this stage.
Are you investigating this video that surfaced, apparently from a white nationalist group taken from a location that could afford them access to Parliament?
That was investigated earlier in the day and I'm satisfied that's been resolved.
How so? Was it a white nationalist group and did they have potential access to Parliament?
No, they did not.
Okay. You've raised concerns about young children on site. Who's encouraging their presence and how?
Yes, a number of the various interest groups down there are encouraging. You're seeing this across the social media platforms. There's a lot of incorrect information, people's rights versus police powers, and indeed some open source and encouragement, bring your children. Quite frankly, less than ideal, but another key factor in terms of us having to carefully consider and work through in terms of how we might operationally deploy to that.
Just having a little trouble hearing you, Superintendent. I'm wondering if you could just adjust the handset. It's slightly muffled. But also, can you just talk to us about why some of your police officers turned up wearing batons today?
Yes, that occurred earlier in the day. There was an escalation point where the forward commander did have that tactical option available, chose to deploy those with a number of staff. That wasn't an option that I wished to explore at this point, and you would have noted that was quickly removed from our tactical options.
So, to be clear, you disagreed with those officers and the instruction for those officers to come with their batons?
Yes, I need to point out that we have a number of tactical options available to us. Long baton is one of those, including the short baton. The staff are currently wearing there at the present moment. This morning, the long baton wasn't an option that I wanted to be deployed.
Why is that? Do you think it will inflame the situation?
It has the potential to do that, and it's simply at this stage, in terms of the mood of what we're trying to police there, that didn't warrant or justify that tactical option.
So what are you doing? Because people watching this will have seen the other day you made significant number of arrests. You were plucking individuals out of the crowd and taking them away. Less activity today. What are you doing to clear them out?
Yes, so today's essentially, you would have seen there's been no arrests made. There was 2 arrests made overnight. We want people to be able to maintain their right to peaceful protest. And we're working in an extremely challenging environment there. It's simply not a matter of continuing to try and arrest everyone that currently occupies that space or ground. And we'll continue to work through our operational planning in terms of looking at continued options.
So is your strategy simply to wait them out?
No, it is not. There's a number of options available too, which
what are they?
Continue to work through. I won't go into the operational sort of tactics that we have available to us, but there's multiple facets here. You've got occupations of surrounding grounds, not only parliamentary grounds, certainly Molesworth Street and that imposition to the Wellingtonians, the business communities. We've had real difficulty in terms of a task at hand there. You've got an excess of 100 vehicles, ranging from a heavy truck through to camper van. That's not a simple logistical task, and we've had considerable issue in terms of Wellington around accessing large rig towing capability. So
around about, Superintendent, sorry to interrupt, but around about how many officers are there right now?
So at the present moment, in excess of 100 police personnel and support staff.
That's a massive resource. So what is happening with other policing and other commitments?
Yeah, so at the present moment I maintain, in terms of our complete service delivery, in terms of our normal business as usual, if you like, frontline policing resource is left untouched, and that is a priority for me as a district commander to maintain that service for the communities of Wellington.
How many police trainees from the college have you got there or who you have been using?
We have used police recruits, but that is a small number of our actual resource.
How many, generally? Ballpark?
Generally 15 to 20 recruits, yes.
And so do they have any powers to arrest or anything like that?
Yeah, so these are officers in their training that are nearing a graduation point, so they're under the supervision of line supervisors.
So no powers to arrest then? They're not actual police officers yet? They're trainees?
They're police officers and have the ability to arrest and assist us in the course of the services we're currently delivering.
What does that mean?
Yeah, so once I'm deploying them out the front line, they have the same powers as the rest of our staff that I'm deploying.
It's a pretty volatile situation at certain points. Are you confident to have, people not even fresh out of college on that line?
Yes, I am. And again, full trust and confidence in my people and the leadership that's down there in terms of our efforts.
I'm just wondering, there were pictures of food trucks, a donut truck, a lot of food coming in, sausages, sandwiches. They're getting power from somewhere. At what point do you cut all of that off?
Yeah, so we've part of our efforts today, and indeed yesterday, is working with local body council in terms of the bylaws and in terms of actually disestablishment of some of those resources. We're well aware of voluntary offers of services. You've talked about the donuts, that was earlier in the day. All matters that we're looking to traverse through. But that said,
so are you going to ban them, Superintendent? Are you going to tell those people in the food trucks, don't come by here, and the volunteers bringing food, are you going to turn them away as well?
That's certainly an option and something that has to be balanced in terms of the local body council, and we've been in constant dialogue throughout the day in terms of trying to progress those avenues.
To be clear, do you need the council to issue some kind of a notice against those individuals in the food trucks?
Yes, those spaces that they occupy are the public place and sit under the remit of the Wellington City Council.
And Superintendent, just before you go, is this going to be done and dusted by the end of the weekend?
Oh, there's every possibility. It could be at any stage, but again, as I said at the start, there's some complexity here, and it'll take as long as it takes at this stage.
Thank you for your time this evening. That's the Wellington District Commander, Superintendent Corey Parnell. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback. Nō reira anei na kaupapa mō te hōtaka nei. What are your thoughts on the police operation outside Parliament with the protest into its fourth day there? And the Superintendent talking about supplies, people bringing in food trucks down there. Is it time to cut that stuff off? Pātui mai, text me 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoints@rnz.co.nz. It's 5:20 and you're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. Kia ora rawatu mo te whakarongo mai e haere aki nei, coming up from 6-packs to food packs, the fitness program delivering essentials to isolating families. The bills for unpaid stays in MIQ have ballooned to more than $38 million 6 months after debt collectors began chasing returnees who have yet to pay. Nearly 6,000 bills are more than 90 days overdue, and some believe the government should be charging interest on them. Katie Todd reports.
For some returnees like Lara Bryden, paying the MIQ bill was a simple job.
An email came to the email that I used to book the MIQ spot. I was happy to pay because I obviously chose to leave New Zealand after a certain date, and for me that was worth it.
But for about 1 in 5 returnees who haven't paid their bills, it clearly hasn't been so easy. The latest figures show the government's recouped $131.7 million, but there's $38.7 million overdue. That's within expectations, according to a briefing given to COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins a year ago, and now released under the Official Information Act. The Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment briefing shows they anticipated needing debt collection for 40% of invoices, and of those, 30% would need to be written off. Waikato University law professor Alexander Gillespie says returnees need to be treated fairly.
you've got to treat citizens the same. So if some people have already paid their bills, you've got to make sure that everyone else is treated the same and that they too should pay them. Because otherwise, if they are allowed to default or the money's not paid, then you'd have to go backwards and refund the money to those who played by the rules.
To get that money repaid, he says the government could charge interest.
If you said, like, if you get it by this date here, we're not going to add interest onto it, then that might be an incentive for some people to sort of like say, okay, look, I'll just do it. But then make clear that if they haven't paid by that date, then they will be pursued to the full letter of the law and interest will be charged at market rates.
An external debt collection agency engaged in July has managed to recover $1.3 million in unpaid debt or get an agreement that it will be paid through instalments. But New Zealand Credit and Finance Institute Director Owen Goodwin is unsure if the government should have put a private company on that job.
There's lots of opportunities for them to go and use their own government agencies as to how they collect debt, places like WINS or MSD, IRD. But to give it to an outside source like a debt collecting company, I think would probably be the wrong choice, because that then puts another emphasis on the fact that they're not able to go and collect their own government debt.
Owen Goodwin believes there wouldn't be so much debt in the first place if returnees were invoiced at the start of their stay. That's something opposition political parties have also been calling for. With New Zealand's borders set to ease open later this month, the government is having to rethink how it charges managed isolation fees when people begin isolating at home instead of MIQ. It will need to decide if unvaccinated arrivals going into MIQ pay in full, whether the current fees scheme should remain, meaning their stays would be subsidised, or whether their stay should be free. MIQ says no decisions have been made yet. ACTA leader David Seymour is against the idea of unvaccinated people having to pay because he's against MIQ continuing at all.
I'm not sure there's a justification for continuing MIQ at all when the requirement for people who have COVID-19 is to isolate at home. Why would we make people who don't have COVID-19 go through MIQ? It almost seems as though it's a deliberate and divisive punishment rather than a public health measure.
MIQ says it hasn't written off any debt to date. COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins has been contacted for comment.
It is 24 minutes past 5. Kia amo tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. The pandemic's been an absolute party pooper, particularly for iconic costume and set suppliers First Scene. Now the company's appealing to people to tap into their sense of fun and dive into First Scene's king-size dress-up box to keep them afloat after so many event cancellations and red light restrictions. Joining us now is Joe Pilkington, the director of First Scene. Kia ora, Joe. What has it been like for you guys during these last few years with the pandemic?
Kia ora, Lisa. Thanks for having me on. For most business owners, Lisa, it's been incredibly hard work, upsetting, frustrating, doing like what every other business owner does, just trying to keep our head above water and carry on and make changes. Be proactive about the situation, but some things, as you are aware, have become out of our control.
Yeah, so what things have you had to do to stay afloat?
Well, and when we got the first pandemic in 2020, I reviewed the business model and made some big changes around that to keep us going. We restructured the way we work. We tightened our belts.
Layoffs,
you can only
Joe?
tighten so far. Absolutely, Lisa, layoffs. Redundancies, change of hours, trying to look after our 18 staff who need full-time work. That's been the hardest, most emotional part, actually.
So some of your core business would be people dressing up for parties, right? And we just haven't been able to do it. So where does that leave you?
Yeah, where I am right now, actually. You're absolutely right. That is definitely a core part of our business is personal celebrations. But the other side of the business is film, theatre, TV, corporates, every big event. And it's marketing, it's ad agencies, it's that type of thing, it's TV shows. But because of the pandemic, you can't have multiple people in a group. So a film can't go ahead. An ad can't go ahead. So it's across the board. People always think we're about having a 21st or a 50th birthday party, but we're so much broader than that.
In saying that, with all the things that you've laid out there, Joe, at every turn you would have been blocked with each one of those things.
Absolutely, at every single turn. And look, we scraped through in 2020. We picked up at the end of the year. 2021 was difficult because the timing was off. And so time when people were actually wanting to come out and go, gosh, we really want to move on emotionally from this, that the second half of last year really knocked us. And with the new traffic light system, it has literally shut our industry down.
So under that red light system, where we are at the moment, you can have up to 100 people at a social gathering, right? But
Absolutely.
But what are you hearing back from people about anxiety about getting together?
Wow. Massive, Lisa. People who are having outdoor events that are open for mid-vaccination people, events that are outdoors, people are frightened. And more than that, organisers are frightened. They do not want to be a place of interest. So even if punters and clients and audience want to go ahead, the companies themselves, the festival goers and other people have actually shut those down.
So, Jo, how do we get a bit of joy back in our lives, right? So what are some of your suggestions? Because I know you're not suggesting that people go out and have a raging great big party and turn into a super spreader event. So what are some of the fun things that you were suggesting that would also help you too?
Sure. Small bubbles. We're a venue as well as a hire company, Lisa, and so we do hold large events here, but we hold small ones, kids' parties, small bubbles of your 12 nearest and dearest that you're comfortable with. But one of the biggest things is actually our clients' forward planning. We know this is a hump of a few months, but those are very, very long months for our industry and for us specifically, is getting our corporates and others out there planning, saying, right, I'm starting this film on this date. Let me tell you about it. I'm going ahead with this marketing campaign. Here's my web series. I'm making my music video. People can do a lot of stuff, Lisa, without big numbers. And we can support all of that in a range of ways to get us through with cash flow for the next few months so we don't lose this extraordinary collection, because once it's gone, it's not replaceable.
Thank you for talking to us this evening, Jo. That is Jo Pilkington, who's the director of First Scene. Now, we're getting a bit of feedback from you guys on the protests. This person says, funny, isn't it? Can't be arrested. Allowed their protests, but they are breaking the law and good people are suffering. I don't think the superintendent had any intention of doing anything with these very selfish people. There is no greater good here, which most protests are about. There's only all about me and my rights, says Vicky. Chris reckons leave the protesters to it. By 2000 this evening, it's going to be a total washout. A reference to the weather forecast there, Chris. And Murray from Wellington says, seems to me the police are waiting for the forecast bad weather to reach Wellington tonight to do the clearing of the protesters for them. And Christine says, so the saga continues. Those who do not do the right thing are winning the war. Non-payment of MIQ, protests at Parliament and small business is failing. That one from Christine. Kia ora e te iwi e Hariaki nei e checkpoint. Tens of thousands of Russian troops are carrying out military exercises on the Ukraine border. Is an invasion imminent? Farmers on the west coast have lost feed and milk's been dumped because tankers can't get through. We talked to the Agriculture Minister who's been surveying the damage. And the power of scraps, the trial to turn Auckland food waste into energy. Homai o whakaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. You can text us 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or there's always the email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's time for the headlines now. Ko Evie anō tēnei.
Thanks, Lisa. Kia ora tātou. I'm Evie Ashton. Protesters on the grounds of Parliament are preparing for heavy rain and strong winds from tonight. Met Service has issued an orange heavy rain warning from 8 o'clock until 3 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. Wellington District Commander Superintendent Corey Parnell told Checkpoint the protesters reflect a wide range of disaffected groups and a lack of leadership in the crowd makes it hard to negotiate. He says protesters are encouraging others to bring children to the protest, which affects how the police respond. Meanwhile, anti-mandate protesters occupying a park in Picton have agreed to move to private land by the middle of next week. About 1 in 5 people billed for an MIQ stay haven't paid. The amount of money overdue has risen to $38.7 million, despite debt collection agencies being deployed 6 months ago. A record high of 446 new community cases of COVID-19 has been reported today. There are concerns COVID-19 cases may spiral in Queenstown, leading to a long-feared shutdown of the resort town's hospitality sector. 9 hospitality and tourism venues have now been identified as potential infection risks. People in flood-prone parts of the Bulla district are on edge yet again, as another round of heavy rain has been forecast in the ranges over the weekend. Most of those who had to evacuate from Westport yesterday have returned to their homes, but Met Service says there's a good possibility the rain will fall in the catchments of already swollen rivers. And the Vodafone Warriors are cancelling their planned first game back at Mount Smart Stadium after years being based in Australia due to COVID restrictions. The game against the Penrith Panthers on Saturday, June 18, was meant to be the Warriors' first game at home in more than 2.5 years. However, CEO Cameron George says the government's border restrictions make it too hard to play. Those are the headlines. We'll have a full news bulletin for you at 6.
Kia ora rā e ho, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. What started as a health and fitness program has transformed into a full-blown food bank because of the crushing impacts of COVID-19. Buttabean Motivation was already delivering between 400 and 700 food parcels a week since the start of the pandemic. But now demand for its services are starting to pick up even more, with families forced into isolation and needing kai to get them through. Our reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Monroe have the story.
Hello, it's Dave from the BBM Food Share with your isolation parcel.
Dave Letele from Buttabean Motivation to food parcels to isolation delivery driver.
Every day, Monday to Sunday, no break, no rest. It's sort of relentless, and it's hard on our families because, but like I said, our purpose is and our why is to help people. But I hope it goes back to normal soon.
For now, and for who knows how long, this is Letele and his team's new normal, driving Auckland's streets, carrying kai down the driveway, over the gate and into the hands of those who can't leave because of COVID.
People that were struggling beforehand, it's just made it worse. There's it's just shone a light on the poverty that's already here, the struggle that people are already experiencing. So one good thing to come out of COVID is that it's opened people's eyes as to what the people down at the bottom, the issues they're facing.
But back up the truck, because this is where it starts, the engine room, where those special isolation boxes are prepared on top of the usual demand for kai. And it's a team effort. Maripa Letele tears open yet another box of fresh fruit.
Dave's my brother. Dave's my older brother. It's personal to me because I know the exact same feeling of not having anything. And just relying on something like this, it's just beautiful, So to be able to provide families with that, it's a real great thing to do.
Across the floor, Carrie Brown says the struggle is real for people in this community, the financial toll of COVID compounded for some by the new need to isolate.
You can't leave the house, so having something like this, it takes the stress out of a lot of families.
So let's have a look at what is in one of these boxes. It should last people roughly a week. We've got, if we look in here, some avocados, we've got oranges, we've got tins of things like, it looks like some mackerel in there, baked beans, all the essentials, long life milk, pasta as well, some cereals. They also get a protein box, that's of course your meats and things like that, and a health box. So you've got washing powder, detergent, all the essentials. Demand at the moment, well, it's not sky high. Of course, isolation isn't that much of a priority at the moment. There aren't that many people isolating, but there is an expectation that as Omicron goes, demand for these parcels will grow as well.
Yeah, eggs and milk. We'll do eggs, milk and meat.
Each isolation parcel is worth roughly $300, a cost on top of the parcels BBM was putting together anyway. The cost is huge, Dave says, and it isn't fully covered by government funding, meaning BBM has to rely on grants, goodwill and donations.
I was on Talkback this morning and he got a shock when I told him I'd spent over $300,000 since August last year on food. That's a lot of money. We came into this premises that we're in here. There's no funding for this. We're just doing it. This is coming out of our own pocket. We've got our staff that are actually trainers running our health programs because primarily we're a health and fitness group. They're here working full time, in our food share.
And Dave himself is now part-time delivery driver. The BBM ute loaded up with fresh fruit and veg, non-perishables, meat and cleaning packs. And he's ready to hit the road. First stop, a couple of self-isolating families in Papatoetoe.
I'm just at your house with your food parcel. What unit is it? Number 5?
It's 3/5.
Oh, 3/5. So I'll just drive down?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just leave it on your door.
Come here. Yeah.
Okay.
And this is barely a drop in the bucket.
It's just exponential growth, you know. I don't even know what exponential means, but I know it means big. It's huge growth. And look, I'm genuinely concerned, you know, about it and how long we can continue to do it, you know. So you got my number now?
Yeah, I got your number.
So just keep in touch with me.
No, for sure.
Okay, thank you, brother. See ya.
And with COVID cases starting to swell, 446 today, and home isolation rules kicking in, they're expecting people are going to need them more than ever.
And they are doing amazing work there. That story from our 2 Nicks. Please check out the video. It'll be up on our webpage. It is time for business news now. Ko taku hoa e nai nei, ko Nona Peltier. Nona, the government's reviewing Kiwibank's ownership structure. Why? And who could end up owning it?
Well, the time has come where the big shareholders in the company called Kiwi Group Holdings, it owns Kiwibank and it also owns Kiwi Wealth and other pieces. New Zealand Post is thinking of, well, apparently, according to some reports, thinking of selling its majority position so it can focus on what it does, its core business, rather than banking, postal services. Now, because of the way the structure works, the other 2 big shareholders, which is ACC and the Super Fund, more than 5 years ago, they bought a stake each in the Kiwi Group, and for 5 years, they couldn't sell their shares outside of those group of NZ Post, Kiwi, the Kiwi Group Holdings, ACC, and Super Fund. So now they can. But before they do, the government has the right of has a first option on those shares. So they're looking at what stake they might want to keep for themselves and what stake might be sold to a third party. That's what's happening right now. It's going to take some time before they sort through that one, though, so we'll have more time to talk about it.
Okay, Nona, we're short on time, so shall we do a quick gallop around the markets, please?
Okay, sure. So, look, the market's real turbulence out there. A lot of concern about interest rates and inflation. That spooked global markets as well as Asia. So we fell, nearly 2% today, the NZX Top 50. Not a surprise given the international reaction to the changing economic conditions. That's a 240-point drop to 12,174. The New Zealand dollar is steady at 66.5 US cents, 93.1 Australian and 49.1 pence.
Ka kite Nona Peltier there with business news. It's been described as a violent gesture and the biggest security threat Europe has faced in decades. Tens of thousands of Russian troops have started military exercises in Belarus near Ukraine's northern border. The US has previously said Russia could invade the former Soviet republic at any time. The Kremlin says it's just rehearsing its defence against an attack. Crisis talks are ongoing with the UK Minister and the French President trying to broker a solution. So where is New Zealand in all of this? Ko taku manuhiri e nai nei, ko Nanaia Mahuta, Foreign Affairs Minister. She joins us live. Tēnā koe e te minita.
Tēnā koe, kia ora.
How would you describe Russia's actions right now?
Yeah, look, we're watching with concern what's happening on the Ukraine border. We are joining the international community to use all diplomatic channels available to de-escalate any tension that may be there.
Do you believe Russia could attack Ukraine at any time?
Well, certainly the militarisation of the border looks very concerning, and again we're working alongside international partners to call for de-escalation that could increase further tension.
The UK says that it has intelligence showing that Russia wants to install a pro-Russia leader in Kiev, and the US says it has intelligence that suggests they've been moving blood supplies to the border to treat potential casualties in some kind of battle. What intelligence have you seen, Minister?
Well, we've got regular updates, certainly from our embassy that's based in Poland and the the diplomatic representations that they've undertaken and for our own ministry here in New Zealand and the channels that we've got. We're accumulating information, but our position at the moment for New Zealand is to join the international community to call for a de-escalation of any tension that may lead to conflict.
The international community has called for a de-escalation. You called for Russia to reduce tensions, but it's ignored that call. And in fact, it hasn't just ignored it, it's escalated things by conducting military exercises. So what does New Zealand do now?
Well, actually, what's happened is that there are a number of international world leaders who have met with leadership in both Russia and Ukraine. For myself, I'm undertaking calls with my counterparts from other countries across Europe, as well as waiting on a call for my call to be confirmed with the Ukrainian Foreign Minister. A lot of them, they work at the moment to use every diplomatic channel available to us to support the de-escalation, the call for a de-escalation of tension, and to further support diplomatic calls to work alongside like-minded partners to ensure that there is no further increase in aggression or tension in the area.
Are you going to recall diplomats? Are we going to sanction Russia in any way?
We're not at that point yet. However, there has been talk amongst the international community, obviously, if there looks like there will be an increase in tension and actions by Russia, that may well be a consideration, but we're not there yet.
There is 100,000 troops, rockets and missile launchers on the border, and they're conducting military exercises. When you say we're not there yet, what would you need to see before we step up action to sanctions and recalling diplomats?
Yeah, let me be very clear. We are in step with international partners in the way that we are responding alongside them to call for a de-escalation, and we are using every diplomatic channel available to us and alongside other international partners to pursue that avenue as a priority.
When you say we're using every diplomatic channel, Russia is friendly with China. We're friendly with China. Have you used any back-channel diplomacy with China to see if they will, have a word with Russia?
We have used our channels directly in New Zealand, for example. We have officials that have talked to the ambassador, the Russian ambassador here in New Zealand. Our post in Poland, we've used them to certainly make contact in Ukraine, in Kiev, and we are using our diplomatic channels to ensure we are in step with international partners on this issue.
Have you spoken directly to the Russian ambassador here?
No, I haven't.
Why not?
Because I'm waiting on my call with my foreign minister counterpart.
Right. So, will you speak to the Russian ambassador at some point?
Actually, the more appropriate channel for me to be conducting dialogue would be to my counterpart, which is the foreign minister for both Ukraine and for Russia, and that's the channel that I'll be pursuing.
And what are you going to say?
Well, again, a lot of what we're observing is of concern, but those matters and those discussions will be a matter for us.
That's a bit of an understatement, isn't it, though, Minister? A bit of a concern? Given Russia's history, given that it has annexed Crimea...
I'm not going to escalate anything that is out of step with what we are doing as international partners in relation to the Ukraine-Russia matter. And as I say, we are pursuing every diplomatic channel available to us to call for a de-escalation of tension, and we're continuing to do that at this moment.
I understand your position, but is war a potential outcome here?
Look, there are a number of potential outcomes.
Is war one of them, Minister?
Where the outcome that we want to pursue is a peaceful outcome, which is why we're joining the international community to call for a de-escalation of tension. And we're in that moment pursuing those channels and conveying that message.
The US President says it would be the largest invasion since World War II and it would change the world. Do you agree with him?
That's speculative. There are a number of diplomatic representations of a number of leaders in Europe to call for a de-escalation of tension in the region.
Appreciate your time this evening. That's Nanaia Mahuta, Foreign Affairs Minister. It is 14 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. He muriaki ina pita kōrero after the news at 6. 2 evacuations in 1 week. Is it time for Westport to move to higher ground for good? The Chief of the London Metropolitan Police, Dame Cressida Dick, has resigned. She's leaving the post 2 years early after London Mayor Sadiq Khan made it clear he no longer had confidence in her leadership. The resignation comes after the police watchdog report revealed misogyny, racism, sexism, bullying and sexual harassment within ranks. The BBC's June Kelly reports.
She made history when she became the first female commissioner of the country's largest force. But tonight, Cressida Dick's long policing career was brought to a sudden end.
Following contact with the Mayor of London today, it is quite clear that the Mayor no longer has sufficient confidence in my leadership of the Metropolitan Police Service for me to continue as Commissioner. He has left me no choice but to step aside.
The Mayor, Sadiq Khan, had already put out his statement.
It's clear that the only way to start to deliver the scale of the change required is to have new leadership right at the top of the Metropolitan Police.
What would be a decisive day on the job for Cressida Dick began at the BBC and a radio phone-in. Responding to a grilling about her performance, she pledged her determination to carry on.
I have absolutely no intention of going.
One officer.
24 hours earlier, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, had issued an ultimatum.
My expectation is the next time I see her, I want to see what her response is.
But their working relationship is over. The finale to a torrid 12 months for the Met. It was almost a year ago that one of their own officers, Wayne Couzens, used his police powers to kidnap Sarah Everard off a London street and then rape and murder her. With a killer policeman under arrest, as women gathered for a vigil in memory of Sarah, more bad headlines for the Met.
The reputation of the Met was much more important than the people she was meant to serve. By not admitting that there were deep structural problems and systemic issues, you're not going to solve them.
While the pressure has been building on Cressida Dick, a few months ago the politicians gave her more time, with the Home Secretary Priti Patel extending her contract. Now the behaviour at Number 10 has led to the Partygate investigation. But even in this, the Met has gathered more criticism for being flat-footed in its response. And then in recent days, shocking messages sent by some officers at Charing Cross Police Station lifted the lid on racist and sexist attitudes which were redolent of policing in the 1970s. In a separate scandal, 2 officers guarding the murder scene where sisters Bieber Henry and Nicole Smallman had been killed also sent abusive messages. Those officers ended up in prison. After 5 years at the helm, Cressida Dick will soon be leaving Scotland Yard for the last time.
The murder of Sarah Everard and many other awful cases recently have, I know, damaged confidence in this fantastic police service. There is much to do, and I know that the Met has turned its full attention to rebuilding trust and confidence and to raising our standards.
Tonight, the Home Secretary paid tribute to Dame Cressida. She began the job as a popular pioneer, but her tenure has ended with her losing the faith of both the politicians and the public.
With more rain forecast for the Bulla district, some frustrated locals have called for urgent flood mitigation work. Evacuated residents in Westport were today allowed to return to their homes to assess the damage. Many of the residents have only just finished the repairs from the floods in July last year and don't want to go through this again. But what can be done to limit the damage of Mother Nature? Professor James Renwick is a climate scientist at Victoria University and joins us now. Kia ora, Professor.
Kia ora, Lisa.
Can we say that this is climate change, pure and simple?
We can say that climate change has played a role. I mean, the way the climate's changed means that every weather system is now different to what it would have been 50 years ago. Climate climate change doesn't cause floods to happen, but it generally makes them worse and probably makes them more frequent. So yes, climate change has played a role in this, but it's not the sole cause.
So twice in a week for an evacuation, and the third time in months that they've also had to move because of bad weather. Can they expect more of the same?
Eventually. It's very hard to say when the next flood will come, but looking over years and decades, we know that as the climate warms, there's more moisture in the air, so when there's a storm, the chances are that we'll get heavier rain falling out. So the future looks like heavier and heavier rainfalls, bigger and bigger river floods, and these kind of things happening more often. So eventually, yes, but exactly when the next storm's going to happen, that's more of a weather forecasting problem than thinking about climate change.
Exactly. So what is the future for Westport then? Is it time to say, that's it for the town, move to higher ground?
Oh, that's a really hard question to answer. You know, in Westport we have two rivers and the ocean. You know, sea levels are rising as well as the intensity of rainfalls and river floods. So there are things that the residents can do. They can build levees on the rivers, they can put up seawalls, and that will protect the population for a few decades at least, I would say, but eventually any of those sort of protective measures will be breached, and maybe that'll bring more grief in future. So at some point there has to be some conversation with the community about whether or not they have to move. I mean, it's a really hard conversation to have, I would guess, you know, because people have lived in the community for generations, and you just don't want to pull up your sticks and move from where you've lived for a long time. But eventually that may be necessary. It's very much a case-by-case basis with each location, but yeah, it should be on the table, the idea that the whole town eventually may have to move.
So, realistically then, while some of this could be mitigated with the measures that you've just outlined, ultimately that is just kicking the can down the road?
Probably. Look, I don't know the details of the hydrology of the rivers and so on around Westport. It may be just kicking the can down the road, and it may be that those kind of protective measures could be good for 100 years. But it's something that needs to be looked at seriously, and the idea that not building those protective measures but instead moving people out of harm's way needs to be considered and needs to be factored into future decisions.
So, putting this specifics aside here, there'd be a ton of other places in New Zealand where this conversation needs to be had as well. Are we having those conversations, and are we moving fast enough?
Well, you're quite right that there's a lot of places where we need to be thinking about this. It seems as though for the population of Aotearoa, you either live near the coast, and if you don't live near the coast, you live on a floodplain of a major river. So a large fraction of the population are at risk, and we need to be having these conversations everywhere. So far, that hasn't happened much. It has happened in some places, but pretty isolated locations. So it's the kind of thinking that does need to be raised on the agenda across the whole country, yes.
Thank you for your time this evening. That's Professor James Renwick, who's a Victoria University climate scientist. Aucklanders' food scraps will soon be kept out of landfill and instead used to power homes and help grow crops. Auckland Council's been running a trial of green waste bin collections on the North Shore in Papakura, and it's going to roll it out to the rest of the city next year. Our reporter Louise Tanuth and camera operator Marika Habazi went to check them out.
Most of our vegetable scraps and dinner leftovers end up here, in a heap of rubbish. It's no secret, we make a lot of it.
So what we know in terms of what Aucklanders are putting out from their residential collections is approximately 100,000 tonnes a year.
Now there's a chance to divert it from landfill and put it to good use, eliminating more than 11,000 tonnes of CO2 per year. General Manager of Waste Management at Auckland Council, Parul Sood, explains.
So the processing plant that we are taking our material to is called an anaerobic digester. So it's an anaerobic digestion processing. What that does is it digests the material, and in the process of doing that, it creates heat and energy as well, in addition to creating digestate, which is a value add to land. So it creates those elements that can be put to use. So the energy and the heat that's created from the plant then can actually help with growing tomatoes in the hothouses or the greenhouses that are next to the plant.
Biogas will create enough energy to supply the equivalent of 9,000 homes and businesses.
These are the green waste bins here. Now they're a lot smaller than your average size bin, but you can put any food waste you've got in them, from bones to even coffee grounds and paper towels. And you just pop them out every week along with your general waste and recycling.
Food scraps make up around half the weight of an average household's rubbish bin. For these Papakura residents, it's drastically reduced their bin loads.
We have our mum living next door, and we put out 180 litre bin about every month now. One bin.
And what were you doing before?
Oh, we would put out would equal to a bag a week.
Oh, it's easier for being here in a rest home, it's easier for them to put them out, you know.
And I guess being in a rest home, that's saving a lot of waste that could have gone into the bin.
Yeah.
I mean, how much do you reckon you're saving by putting those out?
Oh, gee. Easy 80%, I suppose.
The green bins are currently only available in parts of the North Shore and Papakura, so the rest of us will have to wait till March next year for one of our own.
And if you were listening to that on radio, you can check out the video for Louise and Marika's story. We'll put it up on our webpage. A bunch of you getting in touch about the protest at Parliament into day 4 and dragging on, it seems. Bob says, as a Wellington ratepayer, I'm extremely annoyed with the Parliament protest. We have kids to school who are in fear and being harassed for wearing masks. A colleague almost stepped in a pile of human excrement this morning on the way to work. Our work office was closed today. Local retailers are suffering and our beautiful Parliament grounds are being trashed. Why can these people park anywhere and get away with it? They don't care about a parking fine, says Bob. Dave says police probably remember the bad image they gained from Batten charging the anti-Springbok tour protesters 40 years ago and don't want a repeat of that. And this one, having listened to your interview, it is clear that neither the police or the council have control of the situation in Molesworth Street. Why allow more and more people into the parliamentary precinct when the Speaker closed the precinct? The Mayor admitted on RNZ that council had lost control of the area occupied by the protesters. Citizens have had enough. How about acknowledging the police are yet again in no-win situations, Stephen says. They will be damned if they go in with baton swinging or water cannon, soaking everyone and children get caught up, and they're already being damned for appearing to stand back. And another person says, so far, the police seem to have the patience of saints with the Parliament protesters. Without a doubt, some of these protesters would love to have their own version of the US Capitol attack and run amok through Parliament.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening. The police say a lack of coherent leadership among the protesters at Parliament has made it hard to negotiate a resolution to the impasse, now in its 4th day. Wellington District Commander Superintendent Corey Parnell has told Checkpoint there are a number of causes represented, mainly anti-vaccination and anti-mandates, but also random issues such as 1080.
And despite our best efforts to try and identify and engage with any sort of leadership and get some sort of go forward there, that has been a difficulty for police.
Corey Parnell says there's been infighting among various factions, but police haven't observed far-right groups or identified any national security risks. New Zealanders have now had 10 million COVID-19 vaccines administered. The COVID-19 Response Minister, Chris Hipkins, says the milestone was reached around 2 o'clock this afternoon, helped by a big surge in boosters and children having their first dose. He says the 10 million vaccines, including 1.7 million boosters, give communities a good level of protection against the Omicron variant. Mr Hipkins says 95% of people aged over 12 are now fully vaccinated. One one of the highest rates in the world, and 61% due their booster have already had one. The COVID-19 numbers have hit a new high today, with 446 new community cases. A finance expert says the government might be sending the wrong message by using a debt collection agency for unpaid MIQ bills. 6 months since debt collectors were first deployed, the amount of non-payers has increased, with $38.7 million now overdue. The agency has recovered $1.3 million, but Credit and Finance Institute Director Owen Goodwin is unsure if the government should have put a private company on that job.
There's lots of opportunities for them to go and use their own government agencies as to how they collect debt, places like WINS or MSD, IRD. But to give it to an outside source like a debt collecting company, I think would probably be the wrong choice, because that then puts another emphasis on the fact that they're not able to go and collect their own government debt.
Authorities have been considering how the fees scheme will work in the future. The Foreign Affairs Minister says New Zealand joins the international community in calling for a de-escalation of tension on Ukraine's border that may lead to conflict. Tens of thousands of Russian troops have started military exercises in Belarus, near Ukraine's northern border. The US and European countries fear Russia is warming up to invade Ukraine, but the Kremlin says it's just rehearsing its defence against an attack. Nanaia Mahuta has told Checkpoint she's watching with concern what's happening on the border. She says Aotearoa is using all available diplomatic channels to ensure we're in step with our foreign partners for a peaceful outcome. Crisis talks are ongoing, with leaders from Britain and France trying to broker a solution. US President Joe Biden has told American citizens remaining in Ukraine to leave. Joe Biden says he would not send troops to evacuate them should Russia invade. It follows a new advisory from the US State Department warning that America's consulate service in Ukraine would be severely impacted should the country come under attack. The BBC's Peter Bowes reports.
In an interview with NBC News, Mr. Biden said American citizens should leave Ukraine now. We're dealing with one of the largest armies in the world, he said, referring to Russia's build-up of troops along the border with Ukraine. He added things could go crazy very quickly. Mr. Biden said there was no scenario whereby American troops would be sent in to help evacuate US citizens. If Americans and the Russians started shooting at one another, he said, it would be a world war.
National says the promised minimum wage hike will be incredibly hard for many businesses, but won't commit to undoing it if elected. The government's announced the minimum wage will jump $1.20 an hour to hit $21.20 from the start of April. National's finance spokesperson, Simon Bridges, says the government has had to do that because of record inflation.
You can't just solve a cost of living crisis with a flick of a pen on minimum wage. That's something you can do, but it also requires plans for growth and productivity.
Simon Bridges says Labor needs to rein in its new spending. And the 2022 Pasifika Festival in Auckland has been cancelled. The 3-day event was due to be held in mid-March at Western Springs Park. The festival can only be delivered at the orange or green COVID-19 traffic light settings. Auckland Mayor Phil Goff says the cancellation is disappointing, but the right call given the risks posed with Omicron spreading rapidly in the community. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Warren Maxwell selects the mixtape. Paul Kelly and Michael Kiwanuka are this week's Friday Night Live act. Country Life finds out what it takes to breed a new variety of apple, because on this day in 1977, the world's heaviest known lobster, a 20-kilogram monster, was caught off the coast of Nova Scotia. We've got a Sonic Tonic dedicated to crustaceans, because it's a hard shell on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
You're back with Lisa Owen and Checkpoint next, but first the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday. For Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, often cloudy with occasional drizzle, northerlies rising to gale in exposed places late tomorrow. For Gisborne, high cloud, scattered rain easing tomorrow morning. For the remainder of the North Island, rain with some heavy falls, easing for a time overnight and tomorrow morning. Northerlies rising to gale in Taranaki tomorrow night. For Marlborough, Nelson and Bulla. Periods of rain about Golden Bay and the Sounds. Patchy light falls elsewhere. Rain becoming widespread tomorrow with some heavy falls. For Westland and Fiordland, mainly fine. Occasional showers in southern Fiordland. For Canterbury and Otago, mostly fine inland with isolated showers. Low cloud about the coast, spreading everywhere tonight with patchy rain or drizzle. Rain becoming widespread in Canterbury and North Otago tomorrow. For Southland and Clutha, fine spells and occasional rains. And for Rekuhu, the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, the chance of a shower. It's 6 minutes past 6. Our next news headlines are at 6:30.
Nā mihi iwi, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint ko Lisa Owen tēnei. 2 evacuations in a week, and that's on the back of a devastating soaking last July. So is there a future for flood-prone Westport? Most of the people forced out of their homes yesterday have since returned, but more heavy rain is forecast for the weekend, with rivers already swollen. Westport residents are fed up, not just with the weather, but with their council's response to it, and it won't be their last storm. So what's being done to protect the coastal town sandwiched between 2 rivers? Samantha G has more.
For the second time in a week, Melanie Bailey and her family stacked their brand new kitchen cabinetry up off the floor and kept painting their newly installed jib as the threat of floodwaters loomed. Their house was damaged in the flood last July and they're yet to move back in. The family of 4 have been living in a house bus for the last 6 months. They're doing well, but this week was a reminder of the devastation they faced last year.
There'll be a good 2 or 3 hours that you just literally feel absolutely sick, like you need to vomit, because it's just that gut-wrenching feeling of, oh my gosh, we might have to go through this all over again. But then once you're over there and you're into emergency action mode, you just carry on with it. And we're lucky, we've had 2 emergencies and we haven't been flooded, so that actually gives you a little bit of peace of mind.
Westport resident Ruth Vanger says after 2 evacuations in 1 week, she's also feeling weary.
Oh, we're just tired. We're just absolutely tired. And we just want something done about it, yeah. Well, we had a public consultation plan by the Regional Council, who are responsible for this kind of work to protect our towns. And they had a few options presented. One was to do nothing, one was to build a wall. There's an idea to move the town, but they chose the first one, the do-nothing response.
But last year, the West Coast Regional Council voted to proceed with a $10 million flood protection scheme for Westport by installing a series of stop banks and walls around the town. West Coast Regional Councillor for Bulla, Laura Cole-McLaughlin, says the Joint Committee is meeting in early March to make final decisions on the project, with resource consent to be lodged after that.
The Bulla River is one of Westport's greatest assets, but we do also have to have some better management around it. And, Westport has been talking about how best to handle the Bulla River for many decades, and I think that the modern modelling has really enabled us to be able to make some really informed decisions.
She says the cost of any flood protection work is always a factor, and the Joint Committee was in the process of applying for government support to co-fund the project.
It's one of those situations where if you don't spend the money now, you spend it differently later. So these costs spent now in the long term, you will get a return on them in the fact that you won't be having anywhere near the same level of damages or even just community harm and anxiety.
The Joint Committee will also make a decision on whether to create a flood relief cut in the Orowaiti River when it meets in March.
It's not just Westport residents who are fed up with the weather. Dairy farmers have been forced to dump milk because some roads are impassable to tankers. They're echoing calls for local authorities to get in with flood protection work. Local MP and Agriculture and Rural Communities Minister Damien O'Connor has been surveying the damage.
We took a flyover with the Mayor this morning. Thankfully, a lot of the water had retreated, but we saw a lot of silt. We saw a lot of damage to infrastructure, to roading, the rail line, and clearly for a number of farmers, there'll be challenges in regrassing some of their paddocks.
So for farmers in particular, how bad is it? What is the situation with feed?
Look, it's tight. Some of the farmers will have had areas of their land flooded 3 times now in a matter of months. So that means that they've effectively been out of production. And I know some have been milking once a day. That's probably cutting 30% of their production and income out of their farming system. So it is quite challenging depending on where they are. But many of the farmers, or most of them, will know that these areas do get flooded from time to time, but 3 times, in a matter of months, it's a bit much for most of them.
You mentioned infrastructure and roads. Are tankers still able to get in there and pick up milk?
No, not to Karamea, and I think there are about 27 farms out there. So farmers have dumped milk already. They'll be hoping that the road is opened up, hopefully within 24 hours, and be able to move that milk down to Hokitika, where the factory is. But, that's one of the particular challenges for Karamea. I think most of the other farms do have road access and can get their milk out.
So what support are you able to offer for the area?
Look, I was to go down as local MP, but I was also Minister for Rural Communities, and Minister Kerry Allen is keeping an eye on it. I think that local response was first class. I guess they're getting a bit of practice, but they moved and got people out of the low-lying areas, were prepared if the river kept rising. Thankfully, it didn't. And now they're just putting people back into their homes, and the council and others are working on how they restore that infrastructure.
Here's the thing, Minister. As you mentioned, second time in a week that they've evacuated. It's the third time in a matter of months. They've taken a real pummelling. Some people's houses have only just been repaired. You've just painted a picture of farmers who potentially have had feed stocks wiped out. Do you have some money for the region?
Look, we have, and we'll be working with council. There'll be requests come through. There's one project that is a flood wall for Westport. Regional Council have indicated they want to move forward with that. We have to make sure that the flood wall is robust. It's the right thing to do, and will in fact improve the situation for Westport. These are complex natural and dynamic environments. The river, effectively the Buller splits, and then the town becomes an island. We've got bridge access on to the north and south. All of these things mean that whatever solution is arrived at for Westport, it has to be an enduring one. But there are many other places around New Zealand as well, if they were to be hit by 3 weather events in the same time period, would be suffering in the same way. So, look, government's here to help, but we have been saying that climate change is upon us. We have to have some mitigation and some adaptation policies which are being worked on that will mean different things for different communities.
Okay, so in the first instance, Westport, you say you've got some money, how much? And you mentioned the wall. Estimates are that's a $10 million job. So what are you prepared to kick in?
Well, we haven't had a request, and indeed the $10 million may be well short of a comprehensive flood scheme for Westport. It's a guesstimate on a regional council proposal that needs to be looked at really carefully. We need to have endorsement from government engineers as well, and planners to make sure that the money that the taxpayers invest and ratepayers is good investment. But you are going to guarantee them some help? We've always said that, and I don't think we've ever, walked away. By when will you decide? Well, they have to decide when they put a proposal to government. And I know there's some work going on between MB, between other government agencies, from the first event here in Westport. So that work is proceeding. There's no final figure on that. I, as local MP, would like to know that whatever we do come up with is robust and gives us security into the medium term, not just a short-term solution. I don't want to be blunt, but has Westport had its day? Is it time to say, actually, this is the wrong place for a settlement, so we will not build new homes, we won't fix ones that are flood damaged, people need to, move to higher ground, literally? No, I don't think so. I think there are many other communities that are affected in different ways by climatic events. Look, it is a challenging area. Brownmouth was flooded on a frequent basis as well until a flood wall was put in for them. You've got other challenges around the coast, small communities. Yes, those questions have to be asked, but I think that there's a really positive future for Westport, but we do need to put in place some mitigation for Minister, weather events that will occur. So, Minister, are you saying it's more fruitful to fight the force of nature rather than make better decisions about developing our towns and cities?
Knowing what's
But we
coming
need to
down the
make-
pipe with climate change.
No, we need to make better decisions, but there are many ways of mitigating the risks, and it's not for me to say what they are. Wellington, is a city sitting on a fault line. I don't think anyone would say you should stop building or developing there. There are ways of mitigating that. Obviously, the building standards for the new multi-high-rise buildings going up in Wellington will be taking account of those risks. Those are the kinds of things that people in Westport have to take into account if they're building into the future.
And that's Minister Damien O'Connor. It is almost 17 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A few of you are getting in touch about MIQ. These are the outstanding bills that people haven't paid for their MIQ stays. Kathy says, why are people who haven't paid their MIQ fees allowed to leave the country? Another one in says, my sister visited from Melbourne last January. She has asked numerous times for the bill for her MIQ stay, but only received an invoice last week. Amanda from Auckland says, I don't understand why they don't pay up front. It was different in the first few months of 2020, but everyone knows now it seems an obvious solution. And Stuart says, so a person hasn't paid their MIQ bill? Well, the government should put a block on their passport so they can't leave the country until they've paid. That's as well as charging interest. And this one from a listener who says, I recently stayed in MIQ but have yet to receive a bill, which I am happy to pay. I have checked our MIQ account in the hope that the bill is there to download, but no options to see the cost. When do we get a bill? We left there more than a month ago. Maybe this is part of the problem of unpaid bills. And it seems you are right, because you are not the only person saying they haven't received a bill yet. Workers on the minimum wage are in for a pay boost that'll put nearly 50 extra bucks in their back pocket each week. The government is hiking the minimum wage by $1.20 an hour to hit $21.20 from the start of April. The pay rise was a 2020 election promise, but the ACT parties come out swinging, saying it's another kick in the guts for business owners. Our political reporter Annika Smith has more.
The bump in minimum wage will see full-time workers get an extra $48 a week. It adds up to about $2,500 a year. Extra money that will directly benefit about 300,000 workers. Workplace Relations Minister Michael Wood says it strikes the right balance.
It's really important for low-wage workers, people who have got us through COVID, like our cleaners, our hospo staff, retail workers, that we do retain the standard of living, and this decision does that.
The Council of Trade Unions supports the move, but wanted the government to go the whole hog and hike the minimum rate up another $1.55 to the living wage, which is $22.75. Its president, Richard Wagstaff, says low-paid workers are copping the worst of high inflation rates.
We're concerned that we know there's a lot of working poor in this country, people who work hard, can't make the rent, can't pay the bills, and that's just not acceptable. We need to arrange things so that doesn't happen.
But not everyone's so pleased with the wage boost. Business New Zealand says the hike is a slap in the face for businesses struggling to keep their doors open. Its chief executive, Kirk Hope, says it'll mean the difference between some businesses and sectors, such as hospitality, staying afloat and some going under.
They don't have any more money coming in the door. And they're going to have more money going out. So they'll be starting to make some decisions about what their future looks like, I would have thought. And I think that's going to be devastating for that sector and many businesses.
The ACT Party's small business spokesperson, Chris Bailey, a business owner himself with 26 employees, agrees. He says now is not the time to add more pressure to, as he puts it, the only people actually suffering from the pandemic.
We've just gone through, well, we're still going through a 100-year pandemic that the government keeps talking about, and the only people that are actually really suffering from it are business owners who have to keep people employed. Everyone else is just carrying on no problem.
Michael Wood says Mr Bailey's comment is out of touch.
There are workers who have had their hours cut, workers who have sometimes lost their jobs as well. Everyone's felt the pain. We shouldn't be, I think, dividing ourselves here. It's about finding a way through together.
The National Party won't go as far as saying business owners are the only ones suffering and wouldn't roll back the hike to the minimum wage. But its finance spokesperson Simon Bridges says the bump does reflect the government isn't listening to everyone.
I think there can be a view in the Labour Party that business owners never suffer, but we're all fat cats and everything's fine. Actually, there will be real consequences from such a big minimum wage increase.
As well as a hike to the minimum wage, the starting out and training minimum wage is also increasing from $16 to $16.96 per hour from the start of April.
Now, an update on the protest. Parliament's Speaker has just told the media about the plan for this evening, with protesters still on the lawn out the front. Our political reporter Charlie Drever joins me now. So, Charlie, what's happened?
Kia ora, Lisa. Well, what's happened here, the biggest update is the sprinklers. So the sprinklers have been turned on and the protesters in response have placed road cones over them to stop them spraying everywhere. But of course they're still going. And we've spoken to the Speaker, Trevor Mallard, who's told us that his plan is to keep them on all night. So essentially they're looking at bogging out the grounds. He says the lawns are ruined anyway. So the plan is to keep them going all night, making it very muddy here. We're already starting to see a bit of surface flooding, and that's not going to be helped, one, by the sprinklers and two, by the heavy rain warning that's currently in place, starting from 8 o'clock tonight and through to Sunday.
So pretty unpleasant conditions there, Charlie. Thank you for the update. Charlie Drever there. As you would have heard, they've turned the sprinklers on at Parliament. They're going to keep them on all night, and the bad weather is coming too. Europe is facing its most dangerous moment and biggest security crisis in decades. That's according to the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. The warning comes as Russian and Belarusian troops are conducting 10 days of military drills in Belarus near the Ukrainian border. The ABC's Steve Kinane reports.
Within hours of commencing 10 days' worth of military exercises in Belarus, Russia's defence ministry released film of tanks, planes and missile launches being tested as part of joint drills. The location is not disclosed, but Ukrainians don't need reminding that their capital is under 200 kilometres from the Belarus border. After the drills kicked off, Britain's Prime Minister stressed how precarious this situation had become.
This is probably the most dangerous moment, I would say, in the course of the next few days, in what is the biggest security crisis that Europe has faced for decades. And we've got to get it right.
Boris Johnson is hoping a combination of sanctions, military aid and diplomacy will help prevent a conflict. But diplomacy didn't appear to be achieving much in Moscow overnight. The UK's Foreign Secretary Liz Truss told her Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov that his country was using aggression to relitigate the past when it came to its objections towards NATO's expansion eastwards. At a media conference afterwards, Mr. Lavrov returned fire.
I'm honestly disappointed that what we have is a conversation between a dumb and a deaf person. It seems like we listen but don't hear. At least our most detailed explanations fell on unprepared soil. They say Russia is waiting until the ground freezes like a stone so its tanks can easily cross into Ukrainian territory. I think the ground was like that today with our British colleagues, from which numerous facts that we produced bounced off.
At the centre of this crisis is President Putin's belief that Ukraine should never be able to join NATO. But NATO has no short-term plan to let Ukraine join the alliance. And some experts are questioning whether this is an area where the West could give more ground. Samuel Charup from the US think tank The Rand Corporation has written a book on the Ukraine crisis called Everyone Loses.
What I suggested was that we merely acknowledge the reality that today Ukraine is not on a membership track for NATO membership. And the bottom line is that it will take consensus among all allies to offer Ukraine a membership track. And there's no sign that that kind of a consensus is emerging. If that is what we need to unlock the diplomatic track to move this crisis out of the potential military track, to speak, it seems to me that it's something that should be on the table.
As those diplomatic talks continue, the military drills are ramping up. 6 Russian warships have arrived in the Black Sea for a series of naval exercises. Ukraine has condemned the move, accusing Russia of violating international law. Moscow continues to deny it has any plans to invade its neighbour.
In India, a dispute over Muslim headscarves in schools and colleges is going to the country's High Court. The battle in the Indian state of Karnataka led to schools and colleges closing amid rising tensions over students being stopped from wearing the Islamic headdress, the hijab, in classrooms. There have been rival protests and violence over the hijab ban. The BBC's Divya Arya has more.
Muskan Khan wears at home what brought so much tension at college. She's the most recent emblem of India's politics of the hijab.
I just saw the crowd of youngsters who were wearing the shawls. I was just passing. I thought somehow I'll go for the class. But they all started attacking me. And they were rolling the shawls and telling me, go back, you are not allowed for the class while wearing burqa. And they were giving the slogans as Jai Shri Ram, Jai Shri Ram, Jai Shri Ram. They were coming in near my ears and telling me that Jai Shri Ram, remove this burqa and go back.
It was one front in the last week in an escalating row over whether people can wear the hijab in classrooms in the southern state of Karnataka, where demand for Islamic headdresses was met with protesters wearing saffron shawls, a symbol of Hinduism, and their respective slogans came to the fore.
I was angry and little bit I was scared, and then I shouted Allahu Akbar so that I get courage, like I get power from my Allah.
Muskan still went to college, something women say they've been doing in the past, wearing hijabs, despite state government words to the contrary.
Recently, some girls decided to wear the hijab to school. That's when we started facing a problem. The school management explained to students that we have a right to decide on the uniform. According to the State Education Act of 1995, the registered institution has the right to prescribe the uniform and students must follow it.
And Mr. Nagesh cited state's High Court judgments backing it up. Now, Karnataka's High Court is to decide on the latest dispute.
This college is one of the many in the state where students wore saffron scarves to protest Muslim women's demand to be allowed to wear headscarves inside college. All high schools and colleges have been shut this week to diffuse passions while they wait for the court to come to a decision. But critics say the state administration has done little to engage the students in dialogue, instead allowing opinions to polarize.
Polarization that has led to, at times, violent protests across the country. That's about more than outward appearances, particularly for India's 200 million Muslims, who, while great in number, are a minority. Karnataka's authorities have prohibited gatherings of more than 4 people. But that doesn't stop often hostile debate from flourishing online.
A humble request to everyone, please do not update the status as like Hindu versus Muslims. I have stood not only for the Muslim girls, for all the non-Muslims and Muslims girls, everyone should stand for their right.
Online and in real life, rights and beliefs are in a painful confrontation.
Well, that's it from us. The Late News team will keep you updated throughout the night and over the weekend. If you've missed anything on the show, you can find Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. Kaua e wari te ata te ro I a mātou kōrero. Just a reminder to check out our videos and stories online. Kia pai tōpō. Have a wonderful weekend.